Yeah, what I'll do is I'll bounce through this, which will probably take twice as long as anyone could ever imagine, and then we do questions and answers. Interestingly, Andrew, you mentioned core in 2010. That started my love affair with New Zealand and Australia. I seem to, having taken half a century to ever get south of the equator, and the first place I ever landed was Auckland. So there you go. That's your fault, really. I guess I've been back many times every year since. So there we go. Are we going to crack on? Otherwise, there's a sense of expectation. We just get going, right? Okay. Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome.
Oh, don't do that. Now, thank you for that. You shouldn't clap until you see when it's worth it. I'm somewhat constrained because I've got to stand next to this TARDIS type thing, so that assuming the webinar is working, so anybody can hear me. But I normally bounce around the place, so this is like time in feet to the ground. Simon said to me, okay, you're coming back to New Zealand, talking about regional development later in the week in Rotorua for Infrastructure New Zealand. Could you talk to us about sort of what is going on? And I thought, it doesn't want to be a heavy engineering lecture, but it probably needs a bit of engineering in it. And moving on probably from the last time, one or two people who got a little bit grayer in the audience from the last time I saw them 9 years ago. This is really what I deal with now, which is a bit of economics, a bit of social engineering, and a bit of railways. It is pretty much what it says there. I don't want you to be switched off by the phrase high speed. We'll cover that off pretty quickly. But it is the role of faster rail in the development of a country, both from an economic point of view and from a social equity point of view. And when I get into it, you'll see why. Okay? Do come in, by the way, and just sit yourself down. Here we go. But I need to just start off by saying, despite your crack about New Zealand, fast rail or high-speed rail, whatever you like to call it, is pretty old now. That was the original one. Some of you probably been to Japan, traveled on Shinkansen, which now looks very different to how it was back in 1964. And the point really is the philosophy around this kind of technology is well understood. Fundamentally, it's about separating out longer distance passenger transport from freight and commuters and rest, so you can run something that is higher speed, something that is higher frequency, so it's actually there when you want it, and something which is very high reliability. And it's an old joke now in Japan that if your watch says 10:18 and the 10:16 is just arriving, it's because your watch is wrong, which may be slightly different to an everyday story of railways, certainly back in Britain. The French describe it, and I think I still quite like this slide, although it's quite an old one now, as shrinking the country. France basically shaped like a square. You can see if you squeeze it by journey time rather than by kilometers, then you can see where they've invested in fast or high-speed rail around the northern and eastern part of the country. And the one part of the country that is still back where it was unsqueezed at all is where there is no high-speed rail at all, which is the southeastern corner, which as a result is economically almost completely undeveloped. The only people that go to live there are largely British expats, because it's a nice unspoilt part of the world where nothing happens and you still have 3-hour lunch breaks. But there is no economy down there. The economy is driven by better connections between cities. If you read stuff on the internet, you would think high-speed rail is all about competing with air. It is not. Air travel actually takes a tiny number of people by volume. Rail is a high volume technology. It is effectively a mass transit system. whether it's suburban or metro or longer distance, it is mass transit. It needs a good flow of people to make it worthwhile. Now, you can imagine very long distance glamorous services that run across Europe, run across China, run across Japan. They're glamorous, but they don't earn any money, and they're not much use to anybody. What matters is the larger flows between more important cities. People need to have a reason to travel. When you look at the number of people who fly, even as I'm told in Australia, between places like Sydney and Melbourne, it's the equivalent of about a train an hour. It's not exactly busy. Aeroplanes carry tiny numbers of people. This is about shorter distance services between places people want to travel frequently, daily, and perhaps more than daily. You don't need to segregate it like the Japanese completely and only have what I'd call intercity travel. Increasingly, this is about exploiting a new corridor for outer suburban trains, fast regional trains. This is all about connecting people. If you remember the phrase, it's all about connecting people, then we'll get along fine with the rest of this presentation. And I won't actually talk a lot about the technology, though you can pick me up in the questions on it. Reality is the technology of going fast by rail is well understood, it's international. It is the same whether you're in China or France or Britain or Germany or Spain or Morocco or Turkey. This picture is of a French piece of technology called a train on German slab track, but the picture is actually in Korea. It's an international system. It works. It works out of the box. But the way it's used is now the more important thing, or the more interesting thing. It's the same technology, but you can use it very differently. I try to draw this almost like a piece of rubber, that you can increase the capacity of the system, but the more trains you put on, you've got to be very careful about them boxing up behind each other and therefore the speed. If you put too many trains on the network, you get in the way of each other and the reliability goes down. So you're kind of squeezing this thing or pulling this thing in a number of different directions. Some places, high capacity is the absolute requirement. And maybe you compromise on, say, speed. Or you need to spend more time maintaining it, which is the availability thing. You can't work it 24 hours. As technology has developed, and this is a comment about engineering, we've been able to pull this piece of rubber in all directions simultaneously. And increasingly, from those early days in Japan, when it was 4 trains an hour, at 210 kilometers an hour, but very reliably, we can now run up to many times that number of trains an hour, somewhat faster, and still reliably. The improvement in engineering technologies have enabled us to pull the envelope. And that's what it's capable of now, if you have to. And the place where we're pushing it most is in Britain, and it is with Highspeed 2. Not because engineers think it's jolly exciting, but because that is the business requirements. Come on to that in a moment. A couple of useless facts. One little railway line is worth more than 2 3-lane motorways in terms of carrying people. But it's less than half the width. So if you start to worry about the effect you have on a country, it's a very narrow corridor across the countryside, but it is taking more than twice the number of people as you'd fit on 2 major motorways. Typically, you set your watch by it. There is not a high-speed railway in the world where you can't do that. And you can go as fast as you could imagine, but you don't have to. Some countries have got a little bit caught up with sort of the engineering pride of, we can go faster than the French, for example. You don't need to. What you do is you need to go fast enough to get the right journey time to have the economic effect that you need. And that's really what most of the rest of this talk is about. Comment about safety there is true. In 55 years, no passenger life has been lost in a high-speed train or a fast train on a dedicated track. Not one. Quite a few around the edges of it, but not actually on the thing itself. One or two of you who are survivors from Core in Wellington might just remember this slide and you think, why on earth has he put up something that's 9 years old? And the answer is because, a bit like the laws of physics, some things don't change. And the thing that doesn't change is it's not about the trains, and it's not about the track, and it's not about the signals, and not about the clever engineering, and it's not even about how it all fits together. It is about, why are we doing it? The start of any program, any project, any initiative has to be nailing, why are we doing this? Because actually, as railway professionals, if you really understand that, and you got that agreement with your funder, with your government, with the people that you serve, then you can work out, how does this operate as a railway? What is the total system that you need? And then you can go, what component, what is the specification for the train and the rest of it that fits into that total system that you can operate in the way you want to deliver the business needs that you want. Why are we doing it is the most important question any railway professional needs to keep in their head. So I will say a little bit about Britain, because Simon told me I had to. But it's the scale of it is different to New Zealand. The scale of it is different to New South Wales. The scale of it is different to other places I'm working. Differently, the scale of it is different to China. But the principles are the same. But if I come to Britain, that's where people live. That's Britain at night. We've missed off a bit around the edges where there's sort of sheep and stuff. But people live, you can see where people live, the major cities. And they're not that far apart. Typically 150 to 200 kilometers. My point earlier, this is not about zooming across halfway across the world. It is about places that are 150 to 200 kilometers apart. Typically, they are 2 to 3 hours apart. 2 to 3 hours apart. Which brings me to the geography of time. There's 3 numbers in here, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 120 minutes. And try not to read through this ahead of me, because otherwise I could just stand here quietly. The 30-minute city. There's enough evidence from around the world that if a city that lives as a single city, behaves as a single city, the city where things happen spontaneously, is a 30-minute across city. People are no more than 30 minutes apart. Think of history. Ancient Rome was a 30-minute city. It was about 1.5 kilometers apart, maybe slightly more. The time it took to walk across. Actually, the time it took to walk across didn't change until the 1900s, to the evolution of suburban or urban transport. So if you look at Venice, Venice is a foot city. Venice is still a 30-minute city, and it's about 1.5 kilometers across. City of London, medieval London, 1.5 kilometers across. You can go to places, great cities in Europe like Vienna, and the city itself is a 30-minute city of people on foot. It was only actually Chicago, I think, was one of the first places where people realized you can create a 30-minute city that's bigger geographically by introducing urban transport, whether it be train or bus or cycle or tram or whatever. More than that, it's no longer a single city. It becomes a collection of cities because it's too big for people to work spontaneously, which takes us to our 1 hour. And 1 hour is probably the most important of these 3 for the purposes of my talk this evening. There's enough, again, enough evidence, and this doesn't matter which culture you're in. This is not about British culture or European culture or Asian culture or whatever culture. You know what? Wherever you are in the world, you have the same number of hours in the day. Sun sets, sun rises. Actually, it doesn't matter how rich or poor you are. The one thing you can't buy is more time. 1 hour is a typical time. It's not, exactly 1 hour, but imagine 1 hour is a good guide of what is a sensible maximum commuting time. Now, some people, it's like when I when I first mentioned this in Australia, and people said, we're Australian, we're tough, we commute for 2 hours, no problem. You go, yeah, but there's a consequence. You're actually far less productive as a human being, and you're far less connected to your family. So there's a social consequence. There's increasing research being done across Europe about a mental impact of people commuting too much. Around an hour, which is, if you like, an investment in an hour each way, that's 2 hours out of your life each day, is about the limit for commuting. But therefore, you look for jobs within that range. The more jobs that are within that range, the more choice you have, the more chance you have of building a career. Now, if you're a business, the more people you can bring within an hour is a bigger skill base of people that you can attract into your business. Skilled people with unique, the best fit for your company. So a business which can attract people from further afield physically, but they're within an hour in terms of time, has the opportunity to get a higher skill base. We've also discovered that by and large, business people do business with people who know more than about an hour away. Not every contract they have, but as many as possible tend to be. Why is that? In a world where everybody has access to the internet, you can, instantly WhatsApp anybody, anywhere across the world. So you might say, as a business person, I can talk to 10 billion people. The evidence is you do most of your business with people that you can meet regularly, easily, look in the eye, shake hands, do a contract, trust. It's a human thing doing business, just like it's a human thing meeting friends and relations. People are prepared to invest that sort of time, and you don't, if you're that kind of distance away, you don't have to thumb through a diary and go, we've each got a free day, it's in 3 months' time. Because it's actually relatively easy to meet each other. It doesn't take a whole day. The last number in there is 2 hours. And I put this in because every country has got a capital, a business capital, not necessarily I'm talking about, business capital. Usually it's political capital, but I realize somewhere like New Zealand, that's different. I tend to think of Auckland as a business capital and Wellington as political. And the same is true of one other Australia, but most places it's the same. There's only one place you'll find the politicians, and that's in the political capital. There's only one place you'll find the corporate lawyers, the takeover specialists, the financiers that you need to make your business grow. Corporate lawyers and financiers are a bit like cavemen. They haven't actually evolved. They tend to live in one place, and they tend to eat together and drink together. I'm standing in an EY office, so this is getting to be a dangerous kind of thing. Go to Sydney, it's a place called Barangaroo. One block is one accountancy firm, next block is another, next block is another. They live in a cave. If you're more than a couple of hours away from them, they can't conceive that you exist. You're too far to go out and get back in a day. You're beyond the horizon. If you're a business more than a couple of hours from the capital city in most of the developed world now, you don't exist. You can't track them. This is a real issue. The other thing about the sort of 2 hours is one of the growing industries in most countries is tourism. Tourists will do a day trip for an hour. They won't do it for 3 or 4 because the ratio between traveling time and visiting time is wrong. They'll go a couple of hours for a weekend. You'll go a couple of hours for a weekend. But if you've got to go 4 or 5 hours, it's a bloody long way for a weekend. You keep in touch with your parents if they're a couple of hours away. If they're 5 hours away, you maybe go to them for Christmas. If they're 5 hours away, they maybe come to you for Christmas, and you get rid of them again. The point is, around 2 hours, there's something magical around 2 hours. I've held on that slide because that's really my key slide. When we start then to think about how we justify investment in new rail system, upgraded rail system, fast rail system, there's more than the benefits to the travellers themselves. Well, that direct benefit is the first category I've got there, and it is time saved. Every minute I save of your journey is a minute you can spend doing something else, even if it's totally squandering it. It's your choice. It could be being utterly productive, it could be snoozing, it could be smoozing, but it's your choice. But if you're going to use this thing, you've got to believe it's going to happen. So the direct other benefit to you is I not only save you time, I produce a transport system that you can rely on, so you don't have to get there an hour early because the thing might be delayed. You don't, that's as much time saved as actual time on a train. There's always a benefit to those who don't use it, who are still travellers. And that we often underestimate, which is the capacity release on the existing network of rail or the existing network of road. Freight users, more local users of infrastructure, you've taken a whole class of people off the road or rail that used to be there. But actually, a very high proportion of people travelling are those who wouldn't have travelled if it wasn't for a fast, reliable connection. Because you do it now because it's easy. The third category, which often dwarfs the first two, particularly in countries more the size of New Zealand or in Australia, is not the transport benefit at all. The cities that you serve, the places you put your, to use an old-fashioned term, station, is the place where business will want to come and develop because the connections to other businesses are better than anywhere else. And I'll come later on to some examples of where the investment has been used to develop a place, and the benefit from that is far greater than the direct transport benefit. And then the last thing is to the wider region. I won't go into that much more because I've got a couple of examples coming up. And the first one is the first high-speed railway in Britain, which cost, I put everything in pounds, it doesn't really matter about converting it because this is sort of 15 years ago anyway, it's about the ratios. 5 billion to build. 5 billion pounds is really quite a lot. We actually built it to connect London with Paris. That's been a complete, well, it's useful, but there's no justification for doing that in terms other than political. There's only the odd train an hour because there's only so many people get up in Paris thinking they need to be in London and vice versa. Yes, it's, and that's back to my point about very long distance. It's not very high flows. It's not what we realised was, I'd normally bounce across to this slide now, but I've got to stand by this TARDIS, so I'll try and direct you. The area of East Kent, which you see there on the map as Margate, Ramsgate, Canterbury, Dover, Ashford, was 20 years ago dying on its feet economically. About 2 hours from London by pretty unreliable and not very nice rail, at least 2 hours by congested road. About 130 kilometres from London, 2 hours. Young people in those small cities were leaving in droves because the traditional employment, which was mining and agriculture, mining shut down and agriculture doesn't employ that many people anymore, certainly not in Britain. No opportunities. Young people were moving into London, leaving and never coming back. Or those who got, good education, got a degree, never come back. The places were getting hollowed out. What you're left with is elderly people and people looking after elderly people. So, yeah, low value jobs doing with, and generally hollowed out economically. What happened when we put them within 1 hour of London? By a train service that happened regularly and reliably. Well, the first thing was, those young people started saying, we don't need to leave. We don't need to leave our nice small houses and backyard and everything else and quality of life near to the beach. Yes, we do have beaches in Britain. We can commute. This is only an hour. And you think, oh, well, you know, it's become a bit of a dormitory. But the point was, it's turned into a dormitory because before there was nothing. And those young people were bringing their wages, their London wages, back into the local community and starting to spend them with those sort of people supporting industries, including whether it be schools, healthcare, shops, coffee places, baristas. Starting each one of those jobs, we could demonstrate supported 2 or 3 local jobs extra. So the economy started to pick up. So the places started to get spruced up. Next thing that happened is people who lived in London, perhaps higher up the kind of career ladder, realised what a nice place it was. So they moved out and they brought with them their bigger London salaries. And that kicked off a whole new set of people supporting industries, including extending their houses and things like that. So jobs for builders and yet more baristas. Third thing happened was, actually, these are not bad places. If only 1 or 2 of you may know them. They're quite historic. And day trippers, everybody goes to London who's a tourist. And then how do you attract them? You attract them by the fact you could get to Canterbury, an ancient city, in under an hour. So suddenly, just as the commuters are going into London, the tourists are coming out the other way. So that instead of supporting sort of cafes and restaurants and everything else that tourists like, tack shops and everything else, that open maybe in the evening and at weekend, suddenly you've got a 7-day-a-week business. They take on more staff. There's now oodles of jobs. This part of Kent is now thriving hugely. We see it in the land value rise, but we see it in the number of jobs and the number of businesses. Yeah, they're not Google, but they're businesses that people have got good, solid jobs. The whole social feel of the place has come up. And in economic terms, that 5 billion of capital investment in that railway, which has probably got about 1 billion to 2 billion of benefit in terms of the fare box, is actually driven 10 billion in just 10 years of economic growth. This railway is worth it, not for the passengers, it's worth it for the effect on the economy. When you start to think about investment in faster rail, you're thinking about developing a place. And you're putting a value on that. And we believe this so much that we're spending rather more on this thing called HS2 now, Highspeed 2. We don't spend money on image consultants. We had Highspeed 1 and this is Highspeed 2. And if we do a third one, it might just be called Highspeed 3. London is a city of gold. The North and Midlands and North of England are cities left behind. The GDP per capita is less than half those of London. The social impact of that becomes a country of 2 halves, a country of London, of riches, and all the other cities feeling left behind. And that's not just an economic problem, it's a social problem, and ultimately it becomes a political problem. My HS2 initial network, which is the red lines, is about connecting up the heart of Britain. To connect everywhere we can to within 2 hours of London, and that's pretty much up as far as the northeast, and connect the cities to each other in well under an hour. Because I'd like to get it an hour door to door, not an hour station to station. The real benefits of this is that we get the cities of Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester and Liverpool all within an hour of each other. And they become a virtual city, a world city, almost as big as London. And they're connected back into London. Why are we doing this? This is a complicated slide about productivity. Again, shows a disparity. There's office rents on the left-hand side. London rents typically £80, £70 per square foot. Birmingham Leeds, a quarter or a third of that. 99 out of 100 of our biggest companies are headquartered in London. And the 100th is headquartered 10 kilometres out of London, so that's almost London. All the big top 100 are in London. Since we announced this, already 2 of those have announced they're going to move out of London because they are going to be within an hour of London, and so they can get back into London when they need to, but actually they can get skilled staff at a better rate, they can get better accommodation in nice countryside away from London. But it's not just a connecting to the capital story, it's about connecting cities to cities. I've called this the manufacturing corridor of Great Britain. Again, you may be familiar with some of these cities, so I won't lecture you on that. But at the moment, these are cities with quite separate economies, quite a long way apart from each other in terms of time. By selectively building new railway and selectively upgrading existing, it's not all about whizzy stuff. It's about getting the journey time to what you want to, which means you go as fast as you need to, not as fast as you can. Birmingham is our big manufacturing capital. The East Midlands is a series of cities where there are small and medium-sized enterprises. Sheffield, a city that had completely collapsed economically a few years ago with the loss of steel and coal, is being reinvented as the city of research and advanced manufacturing technologies. And Leeds is the second city of finance in the country. None of those cities stands alone very well. They each do a couple of things well. They're not big enough, like London, to do everything well. Each one specializes: finance, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, research. What we are doing is connecting them together so that they have the ability to stand together, to complement each other. They're not competing with each other anymore like they have been doing since, gosh, Middle Ages. They're working together. And it was getting those cities to realize that working together meant they could stand in the world rather than standing alone, and that connecting them together, you see my magic 30 minutes as far as possible, and 60 minutes even to pretty much the furthest. You can get, this is what we will achieve in making a virtual city, but each city will have its own identity. They're not identical cities. They're not flat packed cities. They're not, every city is the same. Each city is culturally very different, but economically, we will connect them as if they are one. And there are places where cities are quite close together, and you can't draw a new line through 3 cities like that. It will sort of go around in circles. So what we have agreed with these 3 cities of Derby, Nottingham and Loughborough is that we will build a hub. That will not be a place where we encourage growth, but we are investing in the railway lines, actually, more than the roads, between those 3 cities and the hub, to turn it into, again, a virtual city. I said at the start, there's many different ways you can do this. The technology is the same, but the solution depends on what you're trying to achieve. Andrew said I was working in Czech Republic, and I just for a country not of 60 million people, but a country of 7 million people. Prague you will have heard of, a world city. And then places which are 2 to 3 or 4 hours away from Prague, either because the motorways are jammed or because they're not very good or the railway lines are rubbish or every train gets stuck behind a freight train. So Prague to the second city, Brno, which is to the southeast of Prague, is about 2.5 hours. We will create, with a reasonably fast railway line, Prague to Brno in 1 hour. Brno is a place where young people love to be because it is almost an IT capital, but it's not really taking off because it's just too far away from everywhere else. But it will stand on its own feet as a place that's actually an hour from Prague and an hour from Vienna, but only because we've invested in it. You'll see to the east, the furthest place, almost on the border, is a city called Ostrava. This is almost like the Sheffield of the Czech Republic. An old industrial city where the government has been investing in the university sector, research, and trying to encourage advanced manufacturing. The advanced manufacturers don't want to go there because it's just too far from anywhere. It's over 3 hours from Prague. You can't get the corporate people there because it's so far away. So it's not taking off. We will get it to take off. We will bring it actually well within 2 hours. It's a place that becomes connected. I won't go on about every example. Each city is different and the solution is different in each city. All I'm saying here really is, I started with a British example. This is a Czech example. I'd happily talk about the Australian example, but as I'm about to give a report to government, I shouldn't. No country is immune from these fundamental laws, not just of physics, but of time. Now, I want to just divert into stations. This is very important. As I said to you, one of the biggest benefits is what you do with where you stop. Large cities, you will always get a benefit. You need to get into the centre because that's where the CBD is. But people have also got to get to it. Now, remember, we're putting cities quite close together. If you spend longer on a suburban road or a suburban railway getting to the centre to go to the next city than you actually do on the train itself, we've kind of ruined the effect. So we're not frightened to build stations on the fringe of cities where there's convenient access. It's entirely possible if it's quite a small city, you don't actually want to go thundering into the middle of it, especially if it means knocking down a sort of heritage centre. You can build quite close to the edge of it, provided you connect it with complementary local transport, provided you can get into the city really quickly from the new fast rail station, you can still develop the city. So again, there's ways and means of doing this. There's not a one size fits all. But what you've got to understand is where you build the new station. It is not just a station. A station, of course, is an interchange. It's a gateway to the city. And where the gateway has been put in an area that the city wants to develop, as distinct from a part of the city that's historically so wonderful, nobody wants to develop it at all, that is where you get your economic growth. You go to Lyon, the second city of France, by building the new station, not in the historic centre, but about a kilometre away in an area of a rather run-down area, it has created a whole new commercial centre. The old city is still doing fine. In fact, it's doing better because all the new jobs in the new place go to the historic centre for the shopping, for the entertainment, for everything else. But it's unleashed growth by carefully putting the station where business can grow around it. In Japan, Shinagawa is an obvious example, and we are doing this big time in Britain. I've got a couple of examples coming up in a moment, which is Old Oak Common and Birmingham. There's something here which says you get the highest development, you get the serious office blocks within about 10 minutes of a station, basically as far as someone can walk in 10 minutes. So it's about 400 meters. And we saw this in Lille in northern France, where big office blocks went up within 400 meters of the new station, and then nothing. That's when you realize actually you can extend the whole benefit by having complementary changes or remapping your local transport network. Doesn't matter whether it's heavy metro, light metro, tram, bus, whatever. In Lille, they put in a light metro line and extended that 10-minute rule by about 1.5 kilometers and extended the number of jobs by several fold. So it's not just about a bit of fast rail, it's about the stations, and it's about rewiring a local transport network to exploit it. And again, you can go to places like Kassel in Germany, I've mentioned Lille, to see this. My rule of thumb, I mentioned earlier, I put on that slide too. Each new key industry job you create will create between 2 and 3 population supporting jobs. They can be everything from the office cleaners, security staff, right through a chain to you've now got enough people to support new schools, new hospitals, new health workers, all the population serving industries. That's what drives so much economic benefit. It's not just a single job, it's a job that creates jobs. Here's Old Oak Common. I said I mentioned Old Oak Common. Not exactly a hive of economic opportunity at the moment. It's a whole area of rubbish just west of London. Old railway sidings and rust and vandalism are not a lot of fun, except for the vandals. This is what we're going to do with it. Because we're putting a station in the middle of that on the high-speed line, less than an hour from pretty much anywhere in the country, that will create, just in that area around it, 55,000 new jobs and some homes. If we go to Birmingham, we are building a station not next to the existing centre, which is immediately north of New Street Station on the left here. We're moving it. We're going to move the centre about 600 or 700 metres to the east, to the right of this slide. What's happening is Birmingham, this is not us, Birmingham has replanned its city to take advantage. 9 years before we run a train, they are already building out this centre, and every building is private money, not public sector money. This is commercial money going into a place that's less than an hour from London. 36,000 jobs. This, the station is going to cost us about £250 million. The economic benefit of the area immediately around the station is forecast to be at least 1.4 billion. That's not a bad BCR before a single person travels on this train. This is an economic development project with trains, not a trains project. And I won't, there's another example there, but in interest of time, I'll just bash on. Bearing in mind that a lot of you are railway engineers, I need to say a little bit about the games of building a railway. All those dots on that map is not measles, it's villages and townships. Threading a railway through that is really difficult. If you're going to do this sort of thing, and if you're going to do this sort of thing in New Zealand, you can't just draw a line on the map and say, we railway engineers have got it right. You have to demonstrate that what you've got, because you're going to affect people, landowners, you're going to affect every community that you pass. Why are you coming this way? Because we've looked at every possible route and we have whittled it down. And we whittled down 104 routes to 6 routes. And then from 6 routes to 3 routes, from 3 routes to 1 route, where we had the evidence that it had the least impact on people overall, it had the best benefit, and the costs were reasonable. We couldn't just say that, we have to demonstrate that we looked at every possible alternative. And that's what you do if you're doing this in an advanced democracy such as New Zealand. People worry about these sorts of images. They look awful. Imagine that across some of the most precious countryside. We went to public consultation. This gets really difficult because it's no good talking about macroeconomic effects to someone whose house you're going to go pummeling through. And it's not a lot of good doing a good railway engineer job of drawing a line on a map. We understand lines on a map. Most people don't understand maps. Most people have got no idea where they live anymore. They just follow Google. This is a really serious issue. We didn't realize this. Another comment I should make is that the best people to do public consultation were our youngest people. At that stage, our team was at an average age of 34 and was about 43% female and had a decent ethnic mix in it as well. Wasn't just grey beards like me. And our young people were brilliant. Do you know why? Because they didn't know all the answers. They had to listen. 2 ears, 1 mouth. They listened. Some of our grand old engineers, and I fell into this trap at times, didn't do much listening because we knew the answers, because we're professional engineers. You have to listen to people and you have to take on what their real concerns are. And it's not always obvious. Line on a map, not good enough. We use BIM. We use BIM like nobody's ever used BIM before. We're now probably the world leaders on using BIM, not for construction, because frankly others are still better at it than construction, but BIM in the early stages of the project to visualize what it would look like. Okay, this is a high-level picture of the railway in 3 dimensions. But we picked this up onto iPads and we could take it to those public consultations and go establish where somebody lived and give them an image of what the railway would look like from their front garden, from their bedroom window, from their community hall, from their church. This made so much difference because a line on a map doesn't tell you that story. It's putting engineering in the front rooms of people's houses. This is a very complicated slide of BIM. What is meant to show, but I put it up there because the key is what's in the title. It's a virtual design, and people say, how would you build it? And because we've done it in BIM, we could demonstrate how you could virtually build, and then what it will feel like operating. We had the evidence in the system where we could run trains past that person's house and tell them what the volume would be, just how many decibels. And decibels, nobody knows what the hell a decibel is, what that would be like. And actually, we ended up on consultation, putting people in booths and playing them what it would be like in 20 years' time when the line is fully open. And we could prove that we were telling the truth. That was quite fun. Not about drawing lines on a map, though. And we used it in... This picture is meant to show that the green bit is actually the railway we will build. The bit above it is the virtual railway for the next 150 years on how we'll operate and maintain it. The bit above it has got pictures like Big Ben, if you look very, very carefully, which says, we took this into Parliament because Parliament worked with vellum. And we had to present this act of Parliament on linen, in the way that actually Brunel did, but actually we justified it using BIM in Parliament. Huge issue is noise. People can cope with a railway when it's finished. They worry about how you're going to build it, how many lorries you're going to take, where you're going to take lorries, and they worry about how noisy it will be. You can make it look pretty, you can build nice structures, but if it's too noisy, 11 o'clock at night, can we hear it? We modelled noise. You've got to remember that most noise on a train comes from the wheel-rail interface, steel wheel on steel rail. And being high speed doesn't change that very much. It's still all about that. What we've done is bury the railway in the landscape. Earth is the most wonderful noise absorber we've got. Don't have to bury it very far, a couple of meters. Germans showed us how to do it. We can get rid of most of the noise impacts just by being a bit sensitive about where we put the railway. And that's our design principle. And when we're on the level, because we've dug out quite a lot of shallow cuttings, we've got some spoil that we can build up alongside the railway when it's at ground level. Not in some sort of, military bund, but actually spread it out and put the land back to agriculture. We actually take very little land permanently. Back to that thin corridor that's half the size of a single motorway, carrying twice the number of people. This image is actually straight a cut off our BIM system. Although I think we had to plug the picture of the train on it. You can't just build rubbish across sensitive landscapes. It costs a bit more, but remember why you're doing it. You're doing it so that cities can thrive and people can have new jobs and new economies grow. If you've ever wondered what an environment statement for a project this size looks like, it's something like that, 50,000 pages. 50,000 pages of environment statement, everything from air quality, through ecology, through every bit of flora and fauna, through to water, waste. So if not A to Z, then certainly A to W. 50,000 pages. A few trees went into that, but actually we only ever produced 3 copies. The rest of it, of course, is online. If you want to read our environment statement and you're really sad and you've got nothing to do for a few weeks, you can Google it. It's all there. Everything we have ever produced is online, because part of convincing people that you're telling the truth is you give them everything you've got. They may not have a PhD in engineering. They may not be an archaeological expert. Put it online. Don't be frightened of being honest with people. And the reasons really come down to where risk lies. People are always worried about the risk in construction, will we find some duff ground, all that sort of stuff, but of course it exists. Commissioning, will the trains and the signalling system fit together? Well, probably not, but we'll give it a go. Will we get the fare box we expect in commercial operation? No, the risk in doing this sort of stuff lies at the front. It lies in that convincing enough people that you're going to make a difference to their lives in cities, and convincing enough people on the route that you can manage the effects. Even if it costs you a bit. The effects, so you've got to be able to finance it, but actually the big risk is political. How long does a government stay in power? 2 or 3 years, 4 years, 5 years if you're lucky? What's New Zealand? Whoopee. So they get elected, they do something for a year, and then they're worried about getting elected the next time out. This is normal. So you have to lift this to a point where it is completely apolitical. Now, the great thing is, the cities that you're going to benefit will be in different political hands than government often, but it'll be a mix. Getting regional governments to believe this is their future means that the national politicians cannot risk taking it away from them. So this is not a project you end up pushing from railway headquarters or pushing from government. You have to do that consultation so that people are pulling it. At the moment, we have a few games with HS2. I mean, our costs are under pressure. We get there, but the costs are under pressure. The people that will not allow it to be diverted are the cities that will benefit from it. Not central government. Central government ultimately, somewhere in there is Treasury. Treasury's job is to stop things. It's the same everywhere. They will not stop it because the cities that will benefit, the cities that will go those tens of thousands of jobs, will not let it be cancelled. So actually, the railway skills are very important, but actually the skills of consultation, the skills of talking with people, incredibly important. I just listed up there some of the forums, and we won't go into details. You won't believe the number of forums. You probably do believe the number of forums, actually. We've done this through an act of parliament because you can't let a single community stop this, with a ransom strip. You have to run it as a national project. It is a national project. It's changing where people are going to live. It's going to change where people are going to work. It's going to change the prosperity of regions. Oh, quite a few petitions, but compared with the environment statement, walk in the park. The other thing we realised quite early on is if you're going to invest in fast rail, if you're going to do something as important as this, don't build it as another railway line. You're building something for the 21st century that's going to be there in the 22nd century. Think, what do people want? All those people that are going to be using it every day. This is, we didn't have a great image consultant for this either. We just gave people some pencils on a very large board and said, and these were people who were partly were passengers today and mainly actually people who never travel by train. Why? And actually the words they came up with have been what we've asked the engineers to design to. And they're words like easy. They're words like convenient. They're words like for everybody. And our design has been built around those words. Whether it be design for everyone. We took all the steps out of this system. And you go, oh, that's a lot of expenditure for 0.5% of people who use wheelchairs. But actually, no, there's 20% of people who have young children, and 40% of people who have luggage, and people who have buggies, and people who are getting old like me who are not quite so clever on their feet. Actually, taking all the steps out of the system improves the experience for everybody. Door-to-door integration of ticketing, of timetables, of everything you can imagine. You have one travel path between your front door and your office, your front door and somebody else's front door. None of this sort of one ticket for that bit, one ticket for that bit, all the things connect up. And you don't reserve this months beforehand. You can be 10 minutes out and go, I'm on the 1742. Oh, I've just met somebody. We'll go for a coffee. I'll rebook onto the 1812. No problem. Technology is easy. It's thinking, how do we use it to make it just a bloody nice experience for people? Because that way, they're never going to stay in their cars. If you make it a horrible traditional 18th, 19th century Victorian experience, people will still stay in their cars, even though it takes twice as long and it's everything else. You just make it so easy for people that you don't need an advertising budget. They just tell their mates. You'll never believe how good this is. It's called a wow factor. Don't be frightened of it. It's personal travel on a public transport system. I want you to be totally in charge of your own experience, door to door. Now we know that's why we're doing it. Our engineering teams, everybody can work out how. And that's the great thing about that triangle I was saying about a long time ago in this talk. And that is it. The point here is you're doing something not for today, not for 5 years' time, not for the next electoral cycle. You're building something here for 200 years. You're building something that your children's children, etc., are going to go, did they get it right? That is the biggest challenge of all. We're judged by future generations. There you go. And I know I've gone on a bit. I know we started a bit late, but I've still gone on a bit. But you stuck with me, so thank you.
This is a railway presentation direction.
We changed the timetable. You go.
A lot of things there that went through, whether it's Highspeed or not. So things there for urban transport, CRM on site. So a number of questions.
Go for it.
Really interesting presentation, thank you. How much a ticket's going to cost?
How much?
How much a ticket's going to cost?
As much as we can do without choking off the economic effect.
Because I guess the slightly less flip envision there is going to be £50 plus, which I imagine they're.
Oh, look,
that
you've got to find a sweet spot. It can't be a free good, but the reason you're doing it is not to maximise the fare box. The reason you do it is to maximise the economic activity. So you actually want people to travel. I mean, the short order is, if you want to travel when 30,000 other people want to travel, it's going to cost you quite a lot. If you want to travel when not so many people are traveling, it'll cost you peanuts. Well, you need people to travel. We need people to travel.
To what extent are the cities that are beneficiaries funding it?
Gosh, you won't imagine how shallow their pockets are. You can't get too hung up on this, because the cities benefit. There is an issue: how much of the developable land the city owns. If the city owns that land, then it will be a direct beneficiary. Actually, it all goes back into the public purse. What you will see is the way the city is helping effectively is it will take less central funds. It will more stand alone on its own feet. So there is this negotiation, which can be a bit rough, between regional government and central government, not who pays for it, but what are the ongoing effects. And the reality is, the wealthier the city, the less that it takes out of the national tax take. The less there are people who are unemployed, and all sorts of things like that. We have played around with a business tax. Did that in London with Crossrail. That's got its supporters. I'm a bit wary about that because, again, you want people to come and grow, and then you will get the benefit through just the greater economic activity. The land values rise. The tax take will go up. Every commercial business will be paying tax, and that will go into the national exchequer. So when you start to look at the big money go round, whilst they may not have their hands in their pockets for very much, actually, in a way, we've got their hands in their pockets for a great deal. But it's a lot more sophisticated than just saying, if you want a station, you pay for it. I've done that in a couple of places, and in a couple of places, developers, like an airport, will pay for the station because it's their land and they know how they're going to develop it around it. But we don't actually want to put taxpayers' money in totally and then somebody else benefit completely. It's got to be a partnership.